Welcome everybody to Flicker Effect. This is episode 270, and we're recording this on Sunday, October 14th, 2018. I'm David Lotz. Joining me this episode is Bobby Jackson.
What's up?
Jascha Wilson.
Hey, everyone.
And Michelle Hillard.
Hello, everybody. Hi.
Hi. What's up, guys? Yeah, let's do this. I don't know what I was gonna say there, but hey, you know what? I'm winging it. So,
That's different from any other week.
yeah, I'm always winging it, right?
Pretty much. Winging a prayer, baby. So what came out this weekend?
Well, I was gonna say real quick first.
Oh.
For those of you who are subscribed to the podcast, you probably caught that there was an episode before this, a spoiler effect episode. Michelle and I discussed our thoughts on First Man, basically right after we saw it. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't listened to it, check it out. We'd be curious to know what you think. That podcast, that we're going to continue doing that, but it's going to be a separate feed from this. So I included that first episode in this subscription feed, but from now on, that's going to be a separate subscription feed, and I'm going to put out details for that soon once it's ready to go. But yeah, I'm thinking from now on, we're going to start kind of sitting down right after we see movies and just kind of talking about it, like our first initial thoughts.
Like our unarticulated first initial thoughts.
Yeah. So we'll talk
That'll be
about
great.
First Man on this episode too. But if you want to hear our initial spoiler-filled thoughts on it,
Yeah.
Check it out. I'll be curious to know what you think.
I feel like that's going to be hard for you, David, considering that when you walked out of movies before, you're like, I really need to process what I just watched.
Right.
Like, I
Yeah, and
need
it
to
was.
process.
I think if you listen to the episode, there were times where I was like, man, I just saw this. Like literally, like we saw the movie, got in the car, came home, sat down in front of the mics and talked. And it was like,
So it was like the 15-minute car ride, basically.
I was like, I mean, this is definitely my initial reaction to the movie. This is what I thought. But when it came to details, it was like, man, I'm still processing this movie. I don't know.
And I will say it's interesting that we chose that film to start off with, because that's definitely let that film sit with you and let it kind of roll around in your head for a while kind of a film. Like it was kind of hard to give like full articulated thought processes on how I felt about it. It was kind of like, oh, well, yeah, it's for this reason, and yeah, it's this for that. Yeah, like it was difficult. It was challenging.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts if you guys both saw First Man. Obviously, I've heard Michelle's. And I'm also curious to hear everyone's take on maybe why it didn't do so well at the box office. I was just reading an interesting article from a writer over at Variety. I believe his name is Owen Gleiberman over at Variety, talking about his thoughts on why it seems First Man really didn't fare that well at the box office. And I like his column. But anyway, I'm kind of curious to hear everyone's thoughts on maybe why this movie didn't really seem to connect with an audience, at least in this opening weekend. But anyway, with that, Bobby, I'm curious if you could maybe kind of steer the ship today. Maybe what would you like to talk about?
Yeah, let's do this. Okay, so, I mean, we're all gathered here together on this Sunday to do one thing and one thing only, and that's talk about some movies. So let's get to it. Oh, man. So last week, us, not collectively, but me, Michelle, and yourself, David, got a chance to see A Star is Born, but Jascha hadn't had a chance to see it. But this week he actually did, so I'm really curious to see, after hearing what we all thought about A Star is Born. Jascha, what'd you think about it?
I mean, no, it was good. I mean, I thought it was a very well done movie. It was inherently sad. Like, I had no idea how unbelievably sad it really was. I mean, we walked out of the movie and we were all just like, nothing like watching a movie about drug and alcohol abuse to make you want to go have drinks with dinner. and
Yeah,
we
pretty
proceeded to
much.
walk out and try to. What's that?
I was saying, yeah, no, pretty much. It was very like, wow, that was
Yeah.
super depressing and sad, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna fill these empty feelings with void with alcohol. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna go have a drink now, but it was good. I mean, Gaga did better than I anticipated. The movie was fun. In retrospect of, pardon me, her acting ability, there were some parts where I was kind of like taken back, and I was watching, and I leaned over to Shannon, and I was kind of like, "Is Bradley Cooper crying without any tears? I'm confused. Like, that seems really dramatic." Now I understand it was still an emotional scene, and it was still very, it was fantastic. Sam Elliott was really good, but I mean, Sam Elliott's good no matter what he does. I feel like he's always been just very, very solid. But that was my takeaway from the movie, is just like inherently sad, brilliantly well done. I thought the dynamic between Gaga and Bradley Cooper were just spot on. Like it really made you believe their relationship and how it progressed and developed. But it was just a very, very sad, heart-wrenching film, and kind of hard to watch at times. So yeah, but it was good.
I feel like Sam Elliott's one of those actors that he basically just comes on the screen and he can just say hi, and you go, God damn, that's good acting.
Yeah. And he just crushes it.
He totally does. He literally can just say hi, and you're like, oh, that man just crushed that.
In other words, you just like Sam Elliott.
I think so. He's just, he's captivating. Like, I don't know. He just is.
It's got that voice.
He has a presence about him. He just exudes like confidence, and I don't know. Just one of those things. Yeah.
It basically sounds like between the four of us, we all really liked it to varying degrees, but
right.
Absolutely, it's something people should go out and see. And I saw that Box Office Mojo, it brought in another 28 million this weekend, which was only a 35% drop from last week. So it's doing pretty well for itself.
Yeah, it's solid for a film that has, like one singular special effect in the entirety of the film. Like, yeah.
Which was that, Michelle? I actually don't know.
It literally was this billboard that they did of her in LA, and it was just the image of her, but you could tell that it was
just fake. Yeah,
it was fake because it was, it doesn't say Gaga on it; it says Allie on it.
Well, it wasn't even that. You could tell, like, they didn't go out of their way to actually put her on a billboard in LA and just put a camera in front of it. You could tell it was an effect.
So, like, my point is, though, for a film that is dialogue heavy, it's very dramatic. Like, that film is pulling in some serious money for being a drama, and musically inclined drama. Like, it's impressive. Like, yeah.
And what also I think makes it impressive is the fact that this week we had a few other entries that came out, and you would think maybe one of those may have been on top, but Venom stayed in the number one spot with what did it make? I think this weekend
almost 36.
I didn't see the number. I think it was 30. Oh, I see it. 35.7 million, and that's a 35% or 55% drop. I didn't know, honestly, where this movie was going to land in its second week, because it seemed very front loaded. A lot of people who wanted to go see it went to go see it that first weekend. So it was like, okay, the second weekend is really going to be something to see exactly if people are liking this and if it will have legs, or if this was less just like one of those things that didn't carry over. But I think the word of mouth and the people who did see it, who had fun with it, just told people, like, don't expect so much, just go into it with this sort of mindset. And it seemed to have paid off and didn't drop that bad, honestly, in terms of what you would expect a second week drop off would be for a movie of this type of nature. So it seems like they have a bright future with Venom as its own spinoff now. So I'm sure people at Sony are very, very happy this weekend.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it did do pretty much, I don't mean to interject there, but it did pretty much do what the projection would be, because traditionally movies drop off about 50%. It just dropped off about a little more than 50%. So when movies, have their second weekend out, it's been historically they've dropped off, like I said, it's just about 50%. So, I mean, granted, I'm happy that it's done well because even though I didn't probably like the movie quite as much as you did, Bobby, I am interested to see how they progress the story along and they adapt, or how long it takes them to really bring out the sequel and the big setup for the sequel that they've done for, with some of the characters, or the main character. I don't know if we talked spoilers yet, so I don't want to really drop that out there, even though I'm sure most people know.
No, yeah, you're right. And honestly, so as David mentioned, First Man, it was the movie that came out opening this weekend, and it came in at the number 3 spot with 16.5 million. And I know Michelle and David said that they saw it. I also had a chance to see it. So I think in terms of this movie, I know that Michelle and David, you guys are in Orlando. So obviously the space program is a big thing from being in that perspective. So do you feel like where you guys were at, that this movie resonated a little bit more in terms of that audience and that specific part of the nation? Did you guys sort of notice that in your attending audience, that people were a little bit more rallied behind it?
I mean, yes, except I have nothing to compare it to. It's not like I saw it with my audience and then I saw it in an audience with a different state. It's like I don't know how different it is, but I will say the audience I saw the film with, they definitely seemed to be a positive response. There was applause after the film was over. I mean, everyone seemed quite into it, and people seemed quite upset by the experience we had with the person and their phone, which we talked about on the other show. But, I think so. But
so
it's hard to say.
That's fair, and I'll get to what my experience was when we come around to it. But since you did go into a lot in spoiler effect, can you just sort of give a brief summary of what you thought of the movie?
I mean, I really liked the film. I liked the film quite a bit, and like I talked about in spoiler effect, I will admit too, though, I go into it as a huge fan of the space program, and I just have a fascination with space flight and all of the history of everything we've gone through with the Gemini missions and Apollo and the shuttle program and everything. So I am fascinated by it in general. So for me, this movie is right up my alley. With that said, I think it's a very well done film, and I liked it quite a bit. I liked all the performances in it. I love the way it was shot and just the way it looked, and especially the scenes on the moon. And I mean, I don't know, I could go on and on and on, but I like the film a lot. But like I'm saying, I also kind of come into it, and you could have made this movie 5 hours long and gone into even more detail about other missions, and I would have just sat through it and loved it. So, right. I mean, I'm admitting that maybe I'd be curious to talk to people who aren't as into, NASA and space exploration and those people who saw this movie. What did they think? That's kind of where I'd be curious to hear that reaction. But I like the movie a lot.
Did you have the same experience, Michelle?
Yeah, no, I'm exceedingly happy with the film. And I too, I'm biased in a few different ways. Like, I enjoy this director. I enjoy these actors a lot. They're some of my favorite actors, and I'm a big nerd when it comes to NASA and space exploration. And honestly, it's like I'm a big fan of kind of just history and American history and just everything. Like, there's a lot of different facets in this film that I think make it really fascinating. And yeah, it was good. It was a good, solid film. It was a well-told story. I just think it was just done really well. And, unfortunately, it not having a really great opening weekend, my only theory is, and I will say, I feel like the marketing behind this film wasn't really there. And I say that, and I can only say it from basically here in Florida and what we've experienced. Like, I feel like I never saw any ads on TV or any radio or even on the internet. Like, I just don't feel like I was seeing any kind of promotion. Like, even when I go through social media, there was no like ads for this film. Like, I feel like it just didn't really have any promo, at least here. And so I feel like that might be one of its shortcomings, unfortunately, because this film is quite spectacular, and I feel that I could pretty comfortably say it's probably going to wind up somewhere in my top 10. And I say that I don't know where, but I feel comfortable enough I can say it's going to be a top 10er for me. So.
Well, okay, so I guess it's my turn to talk about it. And it's interesting because I did grow up a little bit in Florida at a point in time where I remember being in school, and I lived in the most northern part of Florida growing up. It was like Fort Walton Beach near Pensacola. Mm-hmm. And I remember being in school the day watching on TV that the Challenger blew up. And it was like such an experience to see that and witness it in real time and not understanding exactly what's going on. And there was word I think it was this week or maybe possibly end of last week that they're actually going to be making a Challenger movie about the school teacher. And I forget who's supposed to star in it, but I am very interested in seeing that. But that's all to say that my experience with NASA and space is on a level of, I would think, in terms of what David is saying, sort of someone who likes the aspects of it, but isn't super all into it. And when I came away from after watching First Man was that it felt like a really well-made movie in the way that I think that from the technical standpoint and a lot of the sequences you see with them training and getting to really try and figure out how you get to space, not only how do you get there, but how do you get back. All of those elements are so compelling and shot really, really well, especially when you get to see some of those sequences where they're on the moon, and it just feels very, very epic in scale. And the aspects beyond that, it felt like it was a good meal, but not something that was going to stick to my ribs, so to speak, where it didn't feel like. I think lately I've seen a lot of movies that in some way either resonate with me long after seeing them or feel like there's something that is the movie is saying something specifically. And this movie just felt like it was a really good movie and not something that I feel like I'm going to be thinking about years from now or that. And honestly, it was the first movie I've seen in a while where this isn't a biopic, but I know David's big thing I love biopics, but David's thing usually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your thing is that, you kind of already know the story and you kind of get it from a skewed point of view to where it's not necessarily something that you feel sort of in the bag for. It's kind of like, well, you're not really giving me something that is telling me something in a way that I feel invested in. Is that sort of kind of how you feel, David?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, so with me, that's kind of where this is the first time where I felt like I was more in tune to what this story was. So I felt like to a certain degree, I wasn't feeling the stakes because I already knew how the outcome was. And in a lot of biopics where sometimes I may know the outcome, I don't necessarily know much about that journey. And this one, I felt like I knew a lot of things. And and to be fair, and not saying this in a way that takes away anything from it, there are certain things in this movie that I didn't know, and I thought was very effectively told and done with really great performances. But it's just that overall nature. I found myself really wanting to see those aspects of the training and the mission itself expanded upon in a way that was what was sort of really resonating with me and keeping me kind of glued to my seat in terms of what was going on in the film. And the stuff around it, while interesting, didn't really, I guess, kind of carry me along throughout this journey in a way where it felt like it was something epic in total scale. It just felt like there was parts of it that were pretty epic in the way that it was done. So I think that's kind of where I am in the sense that I feel like it's a really great made movie, and that if you want to sort of see this story told, then it's something you should go and see, as opposed to something else that's going to maybe be out there. And I think the other thing that kind of worked against this movie for me is that I had just recently seen something else that did stick with me in a way that still has me thinking about it. And so it's kind of like it kind of came in that second position where it was good, but I just didn't feel like it was great.
Well, I think, though, for me, one of the things the movie does well to counteract kind of what you're saying, where this is a story we all know, right? We've been growing up knowing about Neil Armstrong being the first man on the moon and hearing his speech when he first steps on the surface, and we've seen the footage. And yeah, this movie is introducing aspects to his personal life I think a lot of us didn't know. I didn't know. Like, for instance, I didn't know anything about his daughter. I had no idea. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, to me, I feel like what Damien Chazelle was doing with this to kind of counteract like what could make this interesting is that I thought it did a good job of giving you an idea of the perspective of what it was like to do this from his perspective. Like, we all get that, yeah, we've seen the footage a million times of astronauts doing training and spinning around in rooms and getting used to, G-forces, and we've seen the footage of him landing on the moon and what it was like. But I felt like the movie did a good job of like giving you this perspective of what it was like to be in this claustrophobic situation of the X-15 plane and that whole experience, and then just being on the Gemini mission and in these cramped quarters of these space flights, and what it was like to see the surface of the moon for the first time up close, and then just to land on the moon. And what I thought the movie did really well was to give you that sense of what it must have been like to truly experience it, to truly like, man, I'm on this other world. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a moon, but it's basically a big rock, but still, like, I'm standing on another place, like, and especially in an IMAX theater, which we saw it in, Michelle and I don't know about you, Bobby, and but that all that footage looked drastically different in IMAX. Yeah. And it was just like, wow, like, this is what it looked like for him. And that is probably the thing I liked about the movie the most, is like, the movie a lot of times felt very claustrophobic, because I think a lot of the things he was doing was just very claustrophobic. There was a lot of, the camera was constantly like right up in their face, and in these places they had to train and on these missions, it gave you this sense of how like tight everything was. And I don't know, that's one of the big takeaways from me, was that I was like, wow, this. Not only did I get a kind of a historical perspective of what it was like for him to train and what it was like for him to land on the moon, but I got a better sense of like what this was really like for him.
Mm-hmm. And this is where I was saying, like, there's so many facets to this. I feel like, yeah, they focus on the claustrophobia, and in a way there's a small focus on, the isolation of the entire situation. And I say isolation in different formats, like, the astronauts doing the job that they were doing, it's super hard for anybody who's not doing what they're doing to fully comprehend their thoughts all the time or their emotions. And the astronauts have a hard time connecting with people that basically aren't doing what they're doing. Like, you can kind of get that sense, especially from the, Neil Armstrong's, like, I'm going to say character, because I feel like this is a bit of an exaggeration of his personality as you're watching this film. But you're watching it, and he, at times, has a hard time almost connecting to other people. Like, he becomes very isolated. And then, you get to the moon, And one of the really, and I thought this was really amazing, it really made you feel like you were in it, was this moment where they open up the door and all the air gets sucked out into the vacuum of space, and then it is silent. Like there is just nothing.
Right.
Love that.
And it was such a moment. It was like, oh yeah, sound doesn't exist. Like, you know, and it points, you know, he's just walking around the moon and there's just nothing. And it's just it's very isolating. So it was like there was all these different themes that I think you can pick up on throughout the entire film. And it just kind of envelops you. There's just so many different layers to this onion. You used to peel them back slowly one at a time. And yeah.
Yeah, and you're right, and those are that, as I was saying, is the stuff I really loved about the movie, and like you, David, you were saying sort of you would love to see even more of that, and I think that's kind of where I was coming from, but I also understand your aspect of saying, you know, learning more about everything from his perspective and not just the space stuff, but even being at home and what it's like sort of going through all of this, but honestly, one of the things that I came away from this movie feeling like is that I really want to go back and watch Apollo 12 because I've never seen the movie.
Apollo 13?
Apollo 13.
Yeah, Apollo 13.
You've
talking about the one
never
with Tom
seen
Hanks?
Apollo 13?
No, we've talked about this before.
Wait, hold on. Because it's funny because, yeah, obviously at one point I'm watching the film and that film pops into my head. Apollo 13 is one of my favorite films. Sweet baby Jesus. Why have I not challenged this? Oh, my God, Bobby. Bobby.
It's funny how these things always come up again, but yeah, it's one of those movies I haven't seen, but it did really make me feel like I want to see that movie even more so than I've already wanted to see it. I love Ron Howard, Tom Hanks. I mean, it's just such a great cast, and that movie has everything in it that I think enjoy.
Oh my God! Had I known that, I would have made you watch that film before watching frickin' First Man. Not that they really have. It's just because they're just different feelings. And oh my God, Bobby, I can't. Oh God.
Well, while Michelle has a panic attack over here that you haven't seen, 13, and Jascha is giving me the mind blown. I was going to say too, like, it's funny because Michelle and I, we were recently in Washington, D.C. over the summer and went to the Air and Space Museum for just a little bit.
Just a few hours.
We really didn't have a lot of time in D.C. at all.
It was quick.
But like now it's like, man, I wish I could go back and look at some of the things we were there and seeing about the Gemini missions and such, which, you know, I feel like, oh man, I'd look at this stuff with a different perspective. Not that I didn't know anything about these missions before I saw First Man, but still, because First Man is so fresh in my mind and these different astronauts and what they experience is so fresh in my mind. I'm like, man, I wish I could go back and kind of like actually read more what we saw in that museum.
I was thinking about that too. The thing with Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, is that it is huge. Their collection is vast because this is a point in time in history where man can really collect every moment in the history of this subject. Yeah, you know, even in this film, he points out, he's like, you do realize we just started flying airplanes in the sky 60 years ago. Like, this just happened, kids. Like, There are still people alive that don't remember this even happening. Like, so, you know, it's like you're in Air and Space Museum and there's so much stuff, and they talk about literally the history of flight, and it goes through the whole museum. And then to top it off, there's a whole off-site museum. So there's 2 museums for Air and Space, and then there's all the backlog stuff that they have in their storage, and it's just like, it's mind-blowing. So it's like, I would love to go back and look at that stuff, but it's almost like there's so much of it that it's hard to focus just on something. I don't know. But my point is go to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, see First Man, and watch Apollo 13.
You know, it's funny. There's like this point when, as Michelle was talking about, when they are first going onto the moon and taking their steps onto the moon, when there's that scene, and you can tell, obviously, this is one of those scenes that was shot using the IMAX cameras and would have looked great. And to answer your question, I didn't see it in IMAX. I saw it in a regular theater, but I could tell that it would have looked great on an IMAX screen when he steps onto the moon's surface and it's just like, what is that? The Sea of Tranquility. And he's just sort of looking out, and it's just that gray dust of the moon and then the vastness of space as a background, and he's just sort of panning around. And even though I know obviously what happens, everyone knows what happens, my mind the weirdness of my mind couldn't help but think, like, what if he, as he's panning and turning to look, all of a sudden sees some sort of alien? And I don't know why I knew
What?
I knew that wasn't going to happen.
And this whole film just took a complete left turn.
But
There
it's
is
like,
a true testament as to we have seen way too many movies, and sci-fi is as well ingrained.
but where it comes
Oh
from is the
my
fact
God.
that I was putting myself in his shoes at that moment. It's like, back in that time, to be on a foreign planet, essentially, and it's not a planet, but it's a moon, but on this foreign surface, and you don't know. I mean, we're not advanced even now to know where there might be life, but specifically back then, like, if I was that person setting foot onto this planet, I'd have been scared as hell, just because I don't really know what's there and what you expect to see. So when he's panning around, that's where my mind sort of went. But
no, that's fair. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, like, I'm sure they tried to implement a little bit of that with, the way that you were talking and how absolute quiet and dead silent it was, and how tranquil or how foreign it seemed at that very moment, because you're looking around and it's somewhere nobody has ever stepped foot on before. Nobody's, you're the first person out there. You're the only person out there, and you're looking around, and there's nothing going on. No sound, no noise, no animals, no creatures, no lights. It's just you. And you don't know what else is out there. That would be kind of nerve-wracking.
Yeah. David, as you sort of mentioned, you had read a story about something on Variety that was mentioning why they felt as though the movie didn't do as well as it should.
Yeah, the columnist, and again, I don't have it right in front of me right now, but he was just kind of trying to understand himself, like, why is this movie not really, like, finding an audience? And yeah, there seems to be some of the theories out there which he doesn't agree with, and I don't either, which are from the perspective of the right who are upset that this film didn't include the moment when he plants the flag in the surface of the moon, and how that became a news topic before the film came out. And did that turn away some audience? And I don't really buy into that.
I do not buy that at all.
And then there's the perspective of from the other side, from the left, that the film doesn't do a good enough job of, this film is filled with a bunch of white men, and it's about, this pursuit of a bunch of white men to land on the moon, when I actually like that the film did kind of it touches on the fact that, it wasn't like we were all as a country going, this is great, let's land on the moon, yay. Like, I thought the film did a decent job of kind of showing the fact that a lot of people were like, why are we spending so much money on this? There's people starving. There's people there's terrible schools in this country. Like, and we're sending these guys up to the moon to do what? Just to beat the Russians?
For billions of dollars, and we have schools in the tank. People are starving. Our economy's in the shithole. We have people dying in a country that we don't give two shits about on the opposite side of the world. Like, there was a whole portion of the film that is constantly kind of diving into it on and off throughout the whole section before the Gemini project really takes off. And
so
I mean, when you put it into perspective, it's really like you just said, when it came to the Russians, it's like it was bragging rights. There was no other reason to be up there. There was no other reason or rhyme or reason for it. It was simply just for bragging rights. Even if when we get up there, or got up there, I should say, we didn't know what to do once we got there. We're just like, okay, so we're here. And Anybody else got any suggestions of what we do next? You know, it was really just kind of like a pause. Like we did it, and now what?
So yeah, this columnist also, the idea of maybe from the left, like, oh, some people were upset that the film didn't cover that enough, and he didn't really buy into that either, and I don't buy into that either. I agree with him. I think it's more of that we're somewhat, a lot of us growing up are desensitized to basically the idea of this story about space. Like, we think we know it. We've grown up with Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, and some of the commercials and trailers are trying to show that, oh, this is a more personal story. It's covering stuff about his personal life that maybe you didn't know, but otherwise it's telling a story that I think most people feel like they know already.
Right.
And also, when we've grown up watching things like Star Wars and stuff like that, and that aspect of space, which is obviously total fantasy and totally fiction, but to be interested in a story like this about space, I don't know. He's kind of explaining, like, is that the problem? Is that with the kind of sci-fi that we've all grown up and been watching for years, is a story like this about space really that interesting to a lot of people? And it seems like it's not, because it didn't really seem to connect. I mean, for me, am I surprised that it fell behind Venom? And I'm not really surprised by that. I'm pretty shocked that Star is Born brought in more money in its second weekend than First Man did in its first weekend. That kind of blows me away, and I think that's unfortunate. And I say that as somebody who really liked A Star is Born. I'm not trying to talk badly about that film, but I don't know.
Well, you just said something that kind of resonated with me that really kind of turns me off from seeing this movie now, and I was really interested in seeing it. Well, as you said, it's not like you're learning anything new about the story, really, when it comes to this. I mean, there are different little aspects and tidbits here and there, but you don't really learn too much anything new when it comes to the story of him getting on the moon or anything like that. It reminded me of the movie Ali that Will Smith did a few years ago. A few years ago, actually, it's probably more like 10 or 15 years ago now. But the whole tagline for that movie was "Forget what you know, what you think you know," or something to that effect. And when I walked out of that movie, I was like, why would they say it like that? There's absolutely nothing I learned in that movie that I didn't already know.
Right.
Like, nothing was new. You know, it was almost frustrating to watch it because they didn't explore anything when it came to really him, not going to Vietnam. And then, they kind of touched on the fact that he wasn't allowed to box, and they touched a little bit on his religion. It's just like, this isn't new. This isn't news. This is basically what we've already been told, like, over and over and over again. When it comes to Ali, I'm disappointed in regards that we didn't get a chance to really dive into more of his personal life.
Yeah.
I would say, and I get where you're coming from, but if this is a movie you think you would eventually see, then I would suggest seeing it in the theater and seeing it in the IMAX because of the sequences that we've been talking about. I think that's worth the ticket price alone is seeing those aspects of the movie, because it's done really, really well.
Yeah.
I would almost implore you to see it in a movie theater.
It's the grandness and the scope and the confinement and the isolation. Like, you feel all these feelings. It's very encapsulating, and I feel like you need to experience this in a movie theater minimally, if not an IMAX or a Dolby, and get enveloped in it and let it just wash over you, because it is I think that's the best way to experience it. I think if you wait till you can watch this at home, you are not getting the entirety of what this film was created to do, what it was supposed to invoke in your own emotions.
This is one of those movies that you'll never have quite the experience at home. And there's plenty of movies that you can see at home, and it's perfectly, I would say the majority of films, I think, are that way at this point, with home theaters the way they are.
Right.
But this is one of those movies that it should be experienced in a good theater.
For sure. But
I feel like it's... Go ahead, Michelle.
No, you go ahead, Bobby.
I was just going to quickly say, I feel like this is this year's Dunkirk, in the sense that
Right.
Yeah.
a lot of people said that's one of those movies where if you can see it in a theater, preferably an IMAX, definitely see it that way, because you won't get the same experience seeing it at home.
Yeah. But it wasn't the only film that came out this weekend.
No, and unless you had something in mind, there was something I had wanted to speak about. Michelle, did you have another movie that you saw?
There was a movie I wanted to see and I didn't get to see.
Oh, okay. Well, let me veer that way. But before I go there, I had mentioned that there was a movie that I saw that was impactful to me and resonated a lot, and that was The Hate U Give. And
I thought that was next
it was
weekend.
in its.
Oh.
What's that, Michelle?
I thought that was next weekend.
Well, so this is its second week in limited release, and
okay.
it goes wide next week.
Gotcha.
So I had a chance to check it out, and it was the first movie I saw this weekend. And it stars Amanda Stenberg, who I've only seen her in one other thing, which is the Hunger Games. She was the little girl, I forget her name, in the first movie.
Ray.
Yes.
Was it Ray?
Yeah, the little girl that was there with Jennifer Lawrence's character.
Right.
But so she's in it. Regina Hall is in it. Russell Hornsby is in it. Anthony Mackie, Issa Rae, Common, Algie Smith. It's a really good cast. And the story, for those who don't know, is that Amanda plays this character named Star, and she is navigating her life between two worlds, where she lives in her neighborhood. It's not the best of neighborhoods, but that's where she's more comfortable being herself. And then she goes to school in an all-white neighborhood where she kind of has to act in a certain sort of way so people don't think of her as being ghetto or just being too quote-unquote black. And so she's balancing that. Meanwhile, a friend of hers that she hadn't seen in a while, played by Algie Smith, they're pulled over in an incident with the police, and he gets shot and killed, and then the story sort of goes from there. And what I found so impactful about it is it's really all on the shoulders of Amanda playing this character of Star, and the performances all around are so good, especially by her father, who's Russell Hornsby. And it's just it's at times maybe a little preachy, but it's one of those things where sometimes those preachy movies need to be seen and really help drive home that point. And it's done in such a way that it's not just about that aspect. It's also about this girl, and it really felt like it gives a good window into the world of someone who in 2018 is in that situation where they may not have grown up a certain sort of way, but they're around people who don't have to deal with the same things that a black person has to deal with, that lives in a neighborhood where there's violence and there's drugs and all those other things. But how do you act in those situations? And when your home life, there's so much going on, but at school and being around your other friends who aren't privy to that world, how do you navigate those waters? And I thought it just did such a really, really good job. And they also use the internal monologue is there, where you hear the voiceover, so you really get aspects of what the character's thinking when certain things are happening and going on. And I just thought it was really, really well done. And since it opens wide next week, I can't help but to tell people to go out and see it, because it's such a good film.
It looked really interesting, and I think the story there it looks like it unfolds very well, and it's one that I've been kind of curious to see as well.
Yeah, it's so
It
good.
looks deep as hell. It looks deep as hell, and it really does look like it's just going to tackle a lot of societal issues that we are faced with today. So I'm definitely interested.
I also feel like it's a film that if I watch it, I'm gonna walk out of the theater and just be like angry. Just gonna be like, God damn it! Why can't we just change things tomorrow?
You do get that, but it gives you that sense of like, empowerment in a way as well. It doesn't just make you feel those emotions. Also, it gives you that sense of like, they keep giving us these movies because things aren't changing, so we have to at some point start looking at them and addressing these things, as opposed to just keep on trying to live the status quo. And there's a point in the movie, and this doesn't really give anything away, where it's like there's that conflict sometimes of where certain people will tell you, you know, I don't see your race or I don't see skin color. But then at certain points, a person is like, no, you should see that, because that difference is what makes us all great, is that we should celebrate the differences and acknowledge them, but still treat each other as human beings. And it's just, there's all sorts of good stuff in there. So go see it next week. But if I want to go into something that I believe Michelle was hinting at that came out this week as well, it's Bad Times at the El Royale. Is that it, Michelle?
Yes. I want to see it. It looks good.
So that movie is it was written and directed by Drew Goddard, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, his last project was still Cabin in the Wood. That
I think so, yeah.
Joss Whedon co-wrote.
That was a while ago. Good
Right?
gravy.
And to be fair, his name has been around a little while for other projects. I think at one point in time he was going to do the Sinister Six movie for Sony, and he was also, I want to say at one point maybe attached to an X-Force movie. I could be wrong on that, but I thought he might have been mentioned for it. But yeah, this is his first thing that he's put out in a while, and they were able to get another really great cast for this movie. There's Jeff Bridges, John Hamm, Chris Hemsworth, Dakota Johnson, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some of the other actors that were in this. But I did get a chance to see it this weekend. Well, and the basic premise is that all these different people meet up at a hotel, and they're all kind of like they all have their own sort of backstories, and you don't know exactly what's going on. But the interesting thing about this hotel, this El Royale, is that it seems to be centered on the state line of California and Nevada, and so it has an interesting sort of concept there, is that if you're on this side, you can do certain things. If you're on this side, you can't, because of the state laws. And so that plays into it a little bit. I will say the structure of this movie and some of the thematic tones and setup is very similar to The Hateful Eight. And I say that in a positive way, because there's a mystery afoot here, and the way it plays out, I felt, was done really, really well. And it's a long movie. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes. I think it was almost the same amount of time as The First Man, and it structures itself in such a way that you're constantly like trying to figure out this puzzle as it goes along. And there's a couple moments in there that my jaw just dropped. I was like, oh, it was literally just caught off guard. And it's done in such a well-constructed way. And the characters are all very interesting. In fact, only thing I really feel like I know Dakota Johnson from is the 50 Shades series, and I haven't seen all of those movies. I've seen the first one, but I haven't seen the other two. But so I don't have much of what she's like as an actress, but I will say she came off really good in this, and in a way that I haven't seen her before based on my limited knowledge. But across the board, everyone did such a great job. Obviously, Jeff Bridges is Jeff Bridges, so you know what he's going to do. But just in general, I really enjoyed this movie a lot, and the audience was really with it. Like there were certain things that were going on in the movie, and as a collective group, we were in like audible about certain things and laughing about certain things. Everyone seemed to be really on the same page with the movie. So I think our audience came away really super enjoying Bad Times at the El Royale.
Well, that
I
movie
really wanted to
didn't
see
seem
it,
to.
so I can't wait.
I was going to say that movie really didn't seem to find much of an audience at the box office.
No, it really didn't. And that actually did have really good promoting and marketing, I will
felt
say.
like it did, yeah.
I feel like it did. And that film just didn't seem to grab anybody's attention other than ours.
Honestly, I don't know. See, for me, that feels like one of those movies where, as I was watching it, and our audience was full, but it was a small theater, so it's not like it would have been too hard to fill it up. But at the same time, I was a little bit surprised by how full it was, because to me, before the weekend kind of came around, I really felt like the movie was probably going to do maybe in the 10 to 12 million range. It fell below that. I think it did 7.2 million.
Yeah.
If I read the stats right on Box Office Mojo, but I really didn't think that it would find a huge audience just because of the nature of the movie. It seemed like one of those movies where even if you saw the trailer, it might feel like it's a movie where you didn't feel like you needed to go rush out and see it, and it could be something you could watch at home. But I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think that David and Michelle and Jascha, if you have some time, you should check it out as well.
I plan to.
Me too.
Well, so I guess that's like pretty much it as far as movies are concerned. But I think there's a little bit of news that kind of came out that we can talk about in the last few minutes of the show. One of the bigger ones that really kind of just dropped and caught everyone off guard is that Netflix has officially canceled Iron Fist. And I have to say, I didn't know that would happen necessarily, especially based off of the way season 2 ended. I thought it gave itself a promising road to go down for a third season. Not to mention, it seems like everyone who I talked to who's seen season 2, who also saw season 1, has agreed that it's a step up from the first season and enjoyed it a lot more, and think that the show was starting to go into a good direction. So it was a little surprising to see that Netflix actually pulled the plug on it. But I think it was put out in a tweet that I forget, all of a sudden I'm forgetting the actor's name, Finn Jones. He said that it wasn't sort of the last you'll see of Iron Fist. And my thought is that maybe he'll pop up in some of the other series just to keep the character around, even though the series isn't around. But the last thing I remember, David, is that you had watched Defenders. Had you watched season 1 of Iron Fist?
No. I just finished Defenders like a week ago.
Okay.
But I haven't watched Iron Fist season 1 or season 2.
So you really have no sort of skin in the game as to whether or not this was like a move that was you saw coming, or just thought like it was a sort of a bad thing on Netflix's part.
No, I mean, I will say post Defenders, I've definitely been interested in now watching both seasons. I mean, I get that season 1 has been pretty universally panned, but considering that season 2 sounds a lot better, and from the things I saw in Defenders, I found myself going, well, even if season 1 is not that good overall, I'm still just kind of curious for the information
Right.
about who this guy is and the immortal Iron Fist and what the hell that means, really. And I found myself going, well, I kind of want to watch season 1 now, even though I have a feeling I'll finish it and go, yeah, that wasn't very good, but I kind of just want the knowledge.
For knowledge.
So yeah, that's kind of where I stand. I will say real quick, It's funny. I mean, Netflix is a weird thing, right? Like they don't release like numbers in terms of how many people are watching their shows, and in a lot of ways, they do some marketing. And I've even seen the random billboard here in Orlando for some of their shows, like Glow. I've seen billboards for that here in Orlando, and we don't even get a lot of like marketing for stuff like that, like you see when you live in a place like when I lived in Los Angeles and in New York, where you see billboards and bus posters and stuff for TV shows and movies all the time in cities like that. But here you don't see much stuff.
Yeah, no.
So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is Netflix doesn't seem to do a lot of promotion, I guess, for a lot of their things, and they just kind of drop them and let them be. But I will say, I feel like season 2 of Iron Fist came, and I was like,
it was received.
What I'm saying is, I feel like I didn't really hear much about it. Other than, I follow film news like you guys. I listen to other podcasts, but other than that, I feel like there was really no marketing push behind the season 2 drop of Iron Fist.
No.
And it really wasn't. They didn't do any type of like real push. Like I had somebody at work say, "Hey, have you started watching Iron Fist?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
Like that's out.
And he's like season 2 just dropped, and I'm like, no, it didn't. He's like, yeah, it did. And I immediately rushed to my phone and was like, you get out of here. And I'm like, holy shit, it's been out for a week and I didn't even know.
Right.
And I feel like I'm pretty well versed in when these things come out and what's going on with them. I'm pretty in tune. If it's not me, I get it from 3 or 4 people, like 3 other people, and I'm talking to them all right now. And they're just like, it was a huge shock for me, and I was like, I was taken back by it, and I watched it, and while it was better, I don't know if it would have been enough for me to like really jump in for a 3rd season. I'm not kidding. Like I don't know if I would really have the desire to do it. Like it was better, but it wasn't like, oh, I can't wait to see what happens. Like I am excited about this next weekend with Daredevil coming out. Like I am. That is my weekend. I'm almost blocking off, saying, "Don't expect me to do anything. I want to see what is going down." And that's real talk. Like that's real talk. So it's just like.
I think sorry, go ahead.
I mean, no, it's like, I mean, Luke Cage is. I mean, I'm interested, but I wasn't super happy with how that ended. And I'm definitely interested in seeing how Jessica Jones goes. But oh, by God, when Punisher comes out with their 2nd season, I'm going to be watching that as well. So, but Iron Fist, for whatever reason, I really couldn't resonate with it, and I just really wasn't absorbed and bought into that world. I don't know if it was the actors. I don't know if it was the characters. I don't know if it was the talent when it came to them acting. I just really couldn't sink in.
Michelle, sound like you were about to say something.
I was going to say, so this news about basically, so they announced they're like, oh, they're not doing any more seasons of Iron Fist and blah, 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 blah. And I saw Finn Jones tweet something about it and how he was sad about it. And everybody was like, oh, like the people, I guess, that love it were really sad and really surprised by it. And I'm like, guys, you do realize that he's going to show up in the other ones, right? Right. And then literally the next day, it was like they had to make a whole nother announcement like, whoa, slow down, guys. He's still going to come back as Iron Fist in the other shows, just not continue the Iron Fist saga per se. Like, it was almost like they had to clarify it literally like the next day or 2 days later, because I think everybody was suddenly super bummed by it. And I was like, what? Did nobody else think that that's what that was? I automatically assumed that he was just going to be in the other stuff. Like, it was just so weird to me how, I don't know. Was that anybody else had that feeling, or just me?
No, I mean, I felt like the way they presented it, I could see why people might draw that conclusion, especially if they're just reading the headline and not really delving into the story. Or if they haven't really been that in tune to the other series to know that he's popped up in other places, and that would be a good place for his character to continue. Plus, there's the idea of contracts, and who knows if that's all been worked out as well. So yeah, I think it was at least good for them to follow up with them saying like, he'll still be in other places. So don't despair too much.
Yeah.
All right.
That's just it. Like, we're not supposed to despair too much with the absence of Iron Fist. I don't know if I'm going to miss the absence of Iron Fist. I feel like I could go on with the rest of the Marvel universe that they've created on Netflix and not really miss the character. Like, I mean, maybe if they did another Defenders, which Charlie Cox has openly said he wants to do, if he showed up there, I wouldn't be too upset about it. But I don't necessarily need him to show up. Like, I really don't. Like, I'm kind of hit or miss when it comes to my attachment with that character.
And I think that's why probably Netflix feels like it's probably time for them to kind of cut their losses on it and just sort of have the character appear elsewhere at this point in time. So we'll see if they do anything in the future with some of those other characters and maybe provide some spin-offs. But for now, that's all we're getting for Iron Fist, unfortunately, for some of us. And for others, it's like, we'll see us sometime in one of the other series. But with that, I think we're done for the day, kids. So I'm going to give it back over to David. But before I do want to give a shout out to Carlton Card, because he is always active with us on Twitter at the Flicker Effect account. And I love when he responds to different things because he checks in fairly regularly with us going on with all the different stories that we post over there. So what's up, Carlton? Thanks for always plugging us away.
Hi, Carlton.
Former Flicker Effect cast member, if you will.
Yep.
Best way to yeah.
Yeah, best way to put it. Yeah, guys, I guess time to wrap things up. As always, we'd really like to hear back from everybody. You can email us at feedback@flickereffect.com with your questions or comments. You can hit us up on Twitter and Instagram at @flicker_effect. If you'd like to tweet us any questions or comments, we would love to hear them. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to start a separate podcast feed for Spoiler Effect pretty soon. So look out for news for that subscription link on our Twitter and Instagram and on our website, flickereffect.com. So,
and there's also youtube.com/Flicker Effect.
Yes, you can find these audio episodes on YouTube. There's no video there, but yeah, if you're a YouTube user and you want to listen to this on YouTube, you can find us there.
We are on all the things, and it's free on all the things.
All the things. It's all free.
All the things.
all the things.
With that, I'm David Lott.
I'm Bobby Jackson.
I'm Jascha Wilson.
And I'm Michelle Hillard.
Thanks for listening.